Hey, Chief.
You guys hear me okay?
Yeah. Still sitting in your car?
No, I'm in Starbucks.
Okay. My name is RJ Narang.
Can you hear any background noise? David, you hearing background noise?
I don't.
Right back.
Okay. All right. So you see the list of people here?
I am now.
Anyway. All right. We'll get started in just a minute.
Okay. Guess I'm not a big draw.
Everybody's getting a start on their Memorial Day weekend. And they're missing out big time here. You know, we'll start in 1 minute, and the questions are the question, and feel free to send your questions in now, or as we get going, I'll moderate those for Senator Surovell as we get going. Well, I'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everybody. My name is David Poole. I'm the Executive Director of the Virginia Public Access Project. RJ asked me to come in and moderate today's discussion with Senator Scott Surovell. I'm happy to do it. Be perhaps a bipartisan, nonpartisan organization. I do similar events for Republicans as well, and so it's glad to have you here. And Senator, welcome to you.
It's always good to be back with the Democratic Business Council.
Well, the topic today is the November elections, and what it means in Virginia, and particularly what it means to Northern Virginia clout. And some people have seen this, framed this as a generational election. We've seen a lot of the older generation retiring, stepping aside, and with redistricting, we'll talk about that. Scott, can you kind of just, I think it's obvious to a lot of people, but how do you frame this election? How do you see this election in terms of the state and particularly Northern Virginia?
Well, David, it's an interesting question because I think there's a lot at stake, and I think the way the governor's framing this up is, he's framing this up as his opportunity to clear the field so that he can adopt whatever agenda he really would like to adopt, which he's never really, I feel like, told the voters exactly what he wants to do. In his campaign, he didn't have a platform until very late in the game, and even then, his day one agenda really was not all that specific. What is clear is that number one on his agenda is restricting women's right to make their own decisions about healthcare. The governor's basically said he'll sign his conservative bills they'll put in front of him. He'd personally like to see a 15-week ban on abortions, but I'm sure that won't be the end of it. I'm sure if we were to lose control of the Senate, he'd be back to, and they would control the House still, they'd be back to talking about providing unnecessary information, ultrasounds, hospital-style regulations, and all the things that we saw during the 2010s. Hope you can't hear that coffee grinder back there. I'm in a Starbucks right now. That's one thing. He's also made clear he'd like to continue cutting taxes, which will continue to sort of strangle the ability of us to provide the services we need to provide to people, pay teachers and our law enforcement, first responders, state employees the kind of salaries they deserve. We're still way behind the private sector in what we're paying our private sector employees, and tax cuts, I think, are really not going to be over the long term helpful at all. Our state government is still woefully underfunded in a lot of ways. That's big on his agenda. The governor's made clear he'd like to repeal all the environmental legislation we passed, including the legislation we passed that requires us to transition to the clean energy economy by 2040, the clean car bill, getting us out of RGGI, all those things. So, I mean, I feel like number one, women's rights are on the agenda. Number two, the environment. Number three, taxes. I would also say that a lot of the criminal justice reforms that we passed are probably on the chopping block. I could easily see us having a dialogue about reinstating the death penalty and some other outdated and unproven, disproven policies. I think that's kind of what's at stake in terms of control of the Senate and control of the House of Delegates for that matter.
Okay, what's driving, and we've seen a lot of senior legislators from Northern Virginia announce their retirement. What is it redistricting is the momentum here? It's just kind of a natural generational change. What's behind that?
There's a few things, there's a few variables behind it as opposed to any one specific factor, but I think the biggest variable is redistricting. This year's redistricting was especially disruptive because it wasn't handled by incumbents. Normally, when you have a redistricting cycle, the majority party will do what it can to preserve the viability of not only its majority, but especially its existing incumbents. It's hard to get the votes together to pass a map if everybody who's voting on it doesn't see a path for themselves. And so when the Supreme Court came in and drew a map that didn't pay any attention to incumbency, it really scrambled the map and created a lot of uncertainty. We didn't see as much doubling up in our chamber as they did in the House of Delegates. But we did have 2 incumbents that got paired. The other people who got paired were sort of D's and R's that got paired in ways that were not really viable for the Democrat. But the numbers of new voters in many of these districts made a lot of people sense that they had an opportunity to challenge an incumbent. So this year we're seeing 10 of our incumbents are being primaried, which is really unprecedented. Think about it, 4 years ago, we only had 2 people with primaries, Senator Saslaw and Senator Dance, and that was it. This year it's 10. And so I think all the new voters make people sense there's an opportunity. We also have some donors out there that are willing to fund challengers to incumbents, which historically has not been the case. And so I think when you have some people that are willing to write some large checks to challengers, that also incentivizes people to get in the game. You know, staring down somebody with $500,000 in their bank account is not a really exciting prospect. All they can do is count on raising, 10, 20, $50,000, but you can raise, 6 figures, and some people won't take that chance. And I also just think the general political climate right now has just created a lot of, I would say, sort of political anxiety in people. There's a lot of people who just feel like, they need to do something because of all the problems they see in our world, the pandemic, and it's caused a lot of problems. The Supreme Court has created a lot of uncertainty about people's bodily autonomy and other issues like that. And I think that all those things are sort of converging to cause a lot of people to feel like they want to do something and try to do something about it. And that's sort of where I see it coming from.
Can I ask you about the election in general, or election atmosphere? We've seen a number of incumbents in school board races stepping away. It's like, there's been so much turmoil, these standing room only meetings. But there's a lot of energy on the side that Governor Youngkin is, tapping into. How key do you think in some localities school board elections might be to driving the turnout in November?
Yeah, I really think there's more heat than light there. I think the governor has done an excellent job of sort of creating controversy where there really isn't one. Terry McAuliffe made, an unfortunate comment in that debate that I think Youngkin has sort of tried to maximize into some whole thing that it isn't. I mean, parents have plenty of input at their schools and parent-teacher conferences through their parent-teacher organization and through having input at school board meetings. And nobody's, I don't know anybody that thinks parents shouldn't have any input in their schools. And I think a lot of people are sort of taking this up as a proxy fight for other fights about, their anxiety about how they feel the world's changed, or maybe their kids don't agree with their politics or something like that. I mean, we've seen a lot of political change in this world in the last 20 years. When you think about, where we've come. And so, I think the governor, for some reason, probably because his base keeps, wanting to, there's a lot of this anxiety in the conservative environment, I would say, about how their kids are being indoctrinated or whatever, which is, I don't think being educated is being indoctrinated, but and I think they're doing everything they can to sort of leverage that anxiety. And the way it gets articulated is we got to do something about the school board. And so Youngkin's promised to put a lot of money into the school boards. I think he put $350,000 to a PAC that he's going to use to fund school board races. You got one candidate in Loudon who's saying he'll write big checks to school board candidates. And unfortunately, the climate these guys have created, not just through all the political money that's looming out there, but the litigation. The Fairfax School Board has been sued repeatedly now. They were just validated by the Fourth Circuit last week, but the Loudon School Board's been sued repeatedly. You have the Attorney General creating these fake investigations into them. It's just caused a lot of these people that are getting paid $20,000, $30,000 for these part-time jobs to say, I didn't sign up for this and I'm out. So there's a lot of vacancies on our school boards that again, creates, whenever you have a vacancy, it creates opportunity. And so people choose to run, and there's a lot of different factors playing into that. And I don't think the school board's going to drive turnout. I really don't. I think what's going to drive turnout is a couple things. Number one is women's concern about their bodily autonomy, is I think number one. And number two, I think the dysfunction in Congress is going to create a lot of anger in people by the time we get to November. That's going to cause a lot of people to say they want to come out and send a message, which is normally how our elections in Virginia work in the off year, like we have to deal with.
Okay. Do you, the conventional wisdom I hear around Richmond right now is that the Democrats are expected to hold the Senate. Do you subscribe to that view?
I absolutely do, and I don't just hold to that view because I'm because it's selfish and benefits me and my caucus. I think if you look at the map, most people I think consider about the first 19 to 20 seats to be pretty solidly Democratic seats. Senator Rouse is our newest member. If you look at the sort of, you line up the districts by their political performance, Senator Rouse's seat comes in around the 18th seat. He won his last race by 2 points, and after his district was redrawn, it's about 10 points more Democratic than it was before. So instead of it being like a 49-51 seat, it's now like a 56-44 seat. And so that's the 18th seat. Danica Rome is running in Prince William County, and that seat has not voted for a Republican in 10 years. Then you get to Senator Mason, or actually Senator Donovan's seat actually has not voted for Republican either. And now it's been redrawn. We lost that one barely. That seat is now extremely Democratic. A lot of people see her as being extraordinarily vulnerable. Senator Mason is one of our strongest incumbents. His seat has only voted Republican once, and it was for Glenn Youngkin. I don't think the Republicans had a good candidate they've recruited there. And that's 21 seats. Then the Vogel seat is 22. That seat's only voted Republican once in 10 years. And when it did, it was by 0.5% in the middle of the Terry McAuliffe-Youngkin race. And that's before I even start talking about the Fredericksburg seat or seat in Southside, both of which the Southside seats only voted Republican once in 10 years too. And Fredericksburg's moving our way fast. Bamberger just won it by nearly 6%. So, I mean, I think when people look at the map, they think that most of the opportunities on our side and not the GOP side, especially where the political jet stream is blowing nationally.
Can you talk about what the election results, let's say the Democrats, you're right, and the conventional wisdom holds, and the Democrats continue to hold the Senate. What is it going to mean from Northern Virginia in terms of leadership and committee assignments and committee chairmanships?
It really all depends on how the primaries, well, not all, but partly depends on how the primaries turn out.
Mm-hmm.
We have some of our most senior incumbents right now that are facing primaries. First of all, Senator Saslar has been our leader now for, I don't even know how long. I know how long he's been majority leader. He's been leader of the caucus now for, I want to say at least 10 years. It's probably more like about 15, 18, maybe 20. But his absence is going to be huge. I'm running to replace him as majority leader right now in Senator Lockdown, Hampton, and I'm optimistic that I'll be the majority leader come November, but we'll see how that goes. We're also losing Senator Howell, who's one of our longest serving members. He's the chairman of the finance committee right now, and it's one of the most important positions in the body. Senators Barker, Marsden, Peterson, and McPike up here all have primaries. Peterson, Marsden, and Barker are all committee chairs. Barker is in line to potentially be the finance chairman. The caucus chooses to elect him to be that position. Marsden's chairman of transportation. Peterson is chairman of agriculture, which is our front line against Youngkin's environmental attacks. These are very important, prominent, powerful people that are all being primaried right now. And if any of those three chairs lose, that definitely diminishes our seniority. And Senator McPike, he's been in office for 8 years. He chairs two very important subcommittees, cannabis, gaming, and I think ABC as well, alcohol beverage committee. if these incumbents go down, it's gonna be a big deal. But at the end of the day, I think our caucus is probably gonna have about 11 senators in Northern Virginia at least. Out of it, we'll hope to be 22 to 23, 24 members. And so the power base of our caucus is gonna be Northern Virginia, and I'm hopeful that our leadership will be too.
Okay. All right. We have a few questions here. I'm gonna go to the questions. One is on I guess Paul Friedman asked about guns and gun violence. And there's tragedy after tragedy. And nothing seems to change both on the state or the federal level. He asked, what do you think, what can you do to make Virginians aware of this? And he's asking specifically about Governor Youngkin's refusing to accept millions of dollars in federal funds to prevent gun tragedies. Are you familiar with that issue?
So what he's talking about there is the federal legislation that passed about, I think it was in the middle of last year. I forget which mass shooting, maybe it was Uvalde, that got Congress focused on finally doing something. And it was the first gun legislation that the United States Congress has passed in years. And what Paul's referencing there is that they made about, I think it was $750 million of grants available to states to do many things, one of which is to implement and deploy red flag laws. And I've actually reached out to the governor's office, Secretary of Public Safety, and asked them, can we please draw down some of this money? If you look at Virginia's red flag law, which Senator Barker carried, and I helped him negotiate, and I've defended on the floor for him. If you look at that red flag law, it's used very asymmetrically. It's heavily used in Fairfax County and a few other Northern Virginia jurisdictions. And strangely, it's used a lot in Hanover County, which is kind of counterintuitive. It's never used at all in Chesterfield or Roanoke City. And so there's lots of localities that just don't seem to use the law. And these grants, I think, would go a long way towards educating localities as to their availability, what they could be used for. I think a lot of people realize red flag laws are for suicide prevention and domestic violence prevention, and not just they're the crazy neighbor who has an arsenal. So, I think we're going to have another mass shooting in Virginia. And I think when we do, people are going to go to Youngkin and say, why didn't we draw down some of this money to make these types of tools more available and people aware of them so we can use them? And unfortunately, I think that's probably what's going to be the genesis of getting them to do something. For some reason, the governor seems to have a real animosity to doing anything about guns. My guess is it's Republican presidential primary politics. He doesn't want to be seen as doing that, even though like 10, 11, 12 Republican senators, US senators voted for that bill. We just need to make people aware that the tools are out there. And when these shootings happen, say, why aren't we drawing this money down? I think that's probably the best way we can raise awareness.
And Tom, just stick with guns for a second. Tom Greason is asking about assault weapons. Given the constraints from U.S. Supreme Court decisions, what can Virginia do, the General Assembly do, to reduce or eliminate the threat of these weapons in the Commonwealth?
Yeah, this is a hard one because the constitutional law in this area is really kind of in flux right now. We had some discussions about assault weapons in the 2020 session, and the legislation that was proposed was really in some ways overbroad and not particularly workable for a couple of constitutional reasons. They tried to impose a retroactive ban. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is if you want to make a piece of property that somebody owns illegal, the government wants to say you can't own that anymore, then you have to be paid for it. And I was just curious, and I was poking around to see what a used AR-15 cost the other day, just out of curiosity. What a new one costs. These things cost like $500-600. If the government's gonna make, 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 of these things, which exist in Virginia illegal, and somebody's gonna have to write a check for hundreds of millions of dollars. Actually, it's for people to have to turn them in, or the legislation we heard back then didn't have a buyback program and all that. There's administrative costs associated with that. So What we did in the Senate this year was we passed legislation, didn't pass the House, but we passed legislation that created a prospective ban, which just said you cannot buy these in Virginia, either from a federally licensed gun retailer or from a private seller. So you can't buy any new ones. That's something we can do. Well, let me put it this way. That's a law we can pass that doesn't generate a taking. What is yet to be seen is whether the U.S. Supreme Court will approve a prospective ban. The case that came down last year, New York Rifle versus Bruin, had some extraordinarily problematic language in it, which basically said that we have to view this Second Amendment today. The courts have to view it today through how the drafters in 1791 saw it. I don't know whether, obviously in 1791, people who were enslaved couldn't vote, women couldn't vote, people who owned less than 25 acres couldn't vote. I'm not really sure how you ascertain the intent of people that own 25 acres in 1791, but that's the legal construct we have to work with now. And, I don't know whether the founders would have thought it was okay to ban an AR-15 in 1791. Pretty soon we're going to start getting some legal opinions about it. I'll just note that case, that U.S. Supreme Court case has already been used to take down a bill I passed in Winchester. The city of Winchester passed a law, an ordinance prohibiting guns in their local parks. And the local Winchester County Circuit Court judge said because of Bruin, the founding fathers never would have banned guns in parks, and so therefore they threw it out. And they're doing these challenges all over Virginia, and you're going to start to see all the bills that we passed in 2020 getting attacked in the courts and potentially picked apart. And I think we're trying to legislate in this area, but there's a lot of legal uncertainty about what exactly we can do because this new case came down and nobody really knows exactly what it means because there haven't been a lot of challenges nationally about it. So I think, we can try prospective bans. We have to draw them very narrowly so we don't pick up hunting rifles, because if we pick up anything that people really use to hunt a lot, I think that could be really problematic. Because the way that case is written. But we have to do something. I mean, AR-15s are just a real scourge, and they shouldn't be I don't think these things should be in the hands of people at all. And I think we need to figure out exactly what we can do and do everything we can. But it's not easy legally anymore.
The next question is from Andrea Bridgman, about what do you think the political impact of the news cycle recently about Joe Morrissey?
Yeah, I don't think that if you're talking about the story that came out about his divorce, I don't think that's going to have a big impact on Joe. That Morrissey is a guy who Joe seems to have really figured out that area, that district. When I was the caucus chairman of the House Democratic Caucus back in 2015, Joe ran from office while he was in jail, and the voters returned him. They knew. The Richmond media covers the legislature a lot more than the Northern Virginia media does. And everything Joe does is on the Richmond Times-Dispatch. It's in the news reports every night, and everybody hears about it. And the voters down there have heard all these things. Lots of the things mentioned as divorce are they're not exactly, I wouldn't say they're the same, but it's the similar kinds of stuff that people have been saying about Joe for 10 years. And the voters down there know it, and they've returned him into office. And anybody who's ever walked on a street with Joe will know that people stop their cars when they see him on the street and say, keep doing what you're doing. It's really amazing. People don't do that to me in my neighborhood. But I've talked to reporters that have been interviewing him for this race, and they say people are still doing that in Petersburg. They're doing it in Henrico, where he's represented for like 20 years. It's really remarkable. And the allegations in the complaint are disturbing, but as a divorce lawyer, I will tell you that these are similar allegations that you see in many divorce cases. Not everybody's exposed to that in the newspapers all the time, but most of my divorce clients don't feel very good about how their marriage ended. So, but we'll see. I mean, David, you've been in Richmond. You've seen the news down there in the media, and it's but Joe's resiliency is really, given everything else that gets thrown at him, it's really, I think it's unusual and it's unique.
Yeah, I think the press hasn't picked up on the fact that that district has been refashioned. So the plurality is actually Eastern Henrico, which was Joe's old district, was a very district. You mentioned he was reelected while living in the jail, while serving time at night in jail. He's
Yeah,
kind of
and people talk a lot about Petersburg. Petersburg's not that big. It's only like 30 or 40,000 people, and a Senate district has about 220,000 people. So Petersburg gets a lot of the talk, but you're right. It's mostly an Henrico anchored district.
right. Okay. If there's any more questions, we'll answer those. Can you talk about, some of the districts you mentioned? Can you give us a little bit more drill down? There's 3 districts. I think they're probably the most in play. One's in Loudon, Fauquier, one's in Henrico, and one's in the Williamsburg area. Can you kind of give us what you see the lay of the land in those districts, how it might play out?
Sure. So first, I'll start with our incumbent, Monty Mason. Monty is just one of our, he's one of our most sort of diligent and valuable members. Monty he's a business guy. Spent his whole career. He worked in fraud detection at Visa, I think, before they offered him a very generous buyout. But he lives in the city of Williamsburg, 2 little girls. He actually grew up in Farmville, and he's got a sort of he's grown up in the rural part of the state, in the urban part of the state, and I served with him on, I think, 3 committees: Commerce and Labor, Rehab, and anyway, Monty's a really top-notch guy. The Republicans have nominated a guy against him named Danny Diggs, who's the sheriff of York County. He's a 69-year-old sort of law and order guy. I think they could have done better in terms of recruiting somebody. Diggs I think, is sort of prototypical Republican, sort of conservative, law and order, pro-life, anti-abortion dude. The district that got drawn, Senator Mason's seat, had more of James City County and I think some other parts of Newport News in it, which were more favorable. Instead, they drew it into Poquoson and York. And Poquoson is the one jurisdiction that didn't vote for Mark Warner in 2008 in all Virginia. And it's a pretty conservative place. And York is also a pretty conservative county. It's basically everything on the southern bank of the James River. I mean, the York River. And the seat, pretty reliably votes Democratic, not by a lot, but it's all single digit kind of stuff. And as I said, it voted for Glenn Youngkin barely, but I think by 3%. So it was like 50, like 1.5 to 48.5, something like that. But Senator Mason has real incumbency advantage coming into that one, and I just don't think they did any favors with the candidate they picked there. Monty's gonna be very well funded. He's very well known. It's all the same media market that he's still in. He's been running for office there constantly since 2012, and I think he comes into that with an advantage. The Donovan race, Siobhan Donovan is the one Republican incumbent who's really endangered. Siobhan comes from a long political. First of all, her district's it used to be Henrico, Hanover, and I think a little bit of Louisa. And Hanover's one of the most strongly Republican counties in the state. And Louisa is as well. And Henrico part was always Democratic. Siobhan lost or won her last race by about 12 to 1,300 votes, I think, to Deborah Rodman 4 years ago. And the new district is about 10, 12 points more Democratic than it used to be because they got rid of all the Hanover stuff and all the Louisa stuff. So it's 100% Henrico now. It's just out of Richmond suburbs. Siobhan is, or Senator Donovan, I should say, is she's a tough candidate. She's an obstetrician. She comes from a long line of politicians in Virginia. Her brother was a state senator, Ken Stolley. Her other brother was elected to me to the House of Delegates in 2009. Her other brother's a Commonwealth attorney. And, it's a family that served our state a lot. And she's good. She's good at what she does. But we have an excellent candidate. The seat is now a very Democratic seat. Our candidate is Schuyler Van Valkenburg, who's an incumbent state delegate from Henrico. I think he's been in for 6 years now. Schuyler is a high school government teacher. Schuyler works his butt off. He's one of the most prolific. He's probably the most prolific door knocker in Richmond. And I think that Siobhan's votes on firearms, on choice, the environmental issues, a lot of other things are really going to come back to haunt her in the district that she now is being asked to represent. The governor named her to be part of his team to come up with a 15-week abortion ban, named her in the paper as one of his chief advisors. I mean, that's just not going to sell in that district. And then the third seat, which I think is going to be the hottest one, and I shouldn't say the hottest, it's going to be the most expensive probably in the state, is our seat in Loudoun County. The current member there is Senator Joe Vogel, and but she's decided not to run. It only has about 27% of her former seat. But it basically is everything north of Route 7, starting at the Fairfax County line, all the way out to Leesburg. And when the district gets to Leesburg, it opens up and takes in the rest of Loudoun County, north and south, and then it goes over in Fauquier County, sort of Middleburg, over to the plains, Aldi. Actually, it doesn't have Aldi, but it has the plains, and it has everything down to the Warrenton town line. And I'm really excited about our candidate there. Well, there's a two-way primary going there right now between Russet Perry and Zach Cummings as the Leesburg councilman. Russet, I'm really excited about. She's a Georgetown law educated lawyer, grew up in Texas, came up here for school at GW, went to Georgetown Law. She won a bunch of awards being a domestic violence prosecutor. She's prosecuted done a lot of felony jury trials, put a lot of really bad people away. And she's she went and worked at the CIA for a few years as CIA officer. And she came back to Loudoun and been in private practice now for the last few years. She has two little kids, lives out in Round Hill, which is the more conservative part of the seat. And I think voters are really going to be impressed by her background and her ability. I mean, she's an incredible speaker, having done a lot of jury trials. I've heard her talk a few times, and she's very, when she speaks, people listen. The reason it's going to be really expensive is we're in the Northern Virginia media market, and her opponent is the son of a billionaire. And his name is Juan Pablo Segura. He elected to move to Loudoun County about 8 months ago from DC. He lived in DC for years and decided he wanted to be in this Virginia State Senate. So he bought a townhouse in Leesburg, I guess, moved out there and take millions of dollars of his daddy's money and spend it on TV to try to win the Senate seat. And as I said, the seat's voted Democratic every year except just barely for Youngkin in the last state election. And I don't think that's going to sell. He's extremely pro-life. If you watch his kickoff speech, it was full of a bunch of Republican buzzwords like, CRT and, teachers, indoctrinating your kids and all that kind of crap. And I just don't think that's going to sell well. Loudoun County is one of the most highly educated districts, one of the most high income districts in the state. These are people that don't want people telling them, when they can't have medical care. They're very sophisticated people. I don't think it's going to sell, but that's going to be a really expensive race.
Scott, you mentioned some numbers of this district is plus R, if these districts, as they change, right? I mean, no district's a fixed point. The wind's always blowing one way or the other way. As you look at the races, the last two cycles, the 2021 governor's race and the 2022 House races last year, how far did the wind blow to the Republican side in 21, and how much farther do you think or how much did it come back, and where do you think it's going to be blowing this year? Just the overall kind of force of the winds.
Well, I think when you think about 2021, we weren't on the ballot that year in the Senate. And it's kind of hard to remember all that, but the election season got kicked off by the complete debacle at the Kabul airport, and over the summer, and that's kind of what kicked off our electoral season. And I think by the time we got to November, September, October, a lot of people were very frustrated about what was happening at the federal level. We at that time we had a Democratic trifecta in the Senate, Congress, and the presidency, and if you recall, they were really having a hard time getting anything done. Senator Manchin was sort of holding things up, as he's apt to do. It was a 50-50 Senate, and they were having a hard time figuring out their policy. And if you recall, the last time that happened, we had a Democratic trifecta and things were all calcified. It was 2009. We had a complete wipeout at the state level. I think Creed Deeds lost to Bob McDonald by 19 points. And you haven't seen a Republican tsunami that big since. And I think we saw a sort of miniature version of that back in 2021. The environment was like we had a wind blowing in our face, and once I think the polls show that Governor McAuliffe was in relatively good position until after that debate, and then things sort of started to crater even more after that. So I don't see that being the case this time. This time, when you have split control in Congress, that tends to create a much more ambiguous political environment. The wind doesn't blow really strong one way or the other, but what we've also seen historically is that when conservatives run the House or run the United States Congress, they tend to like to shut the government down. They did that last under Governor in McAuliffe's race in 2013. And we had, I think it was like a 30-day shutdown or something like that. And I mean, I was in office then, and I was the House campaign chairman. The polls really spiked when it happened. We're already looking at that right now, and we're going to have to face this exact scenario again when the government has to adopt its budget by September the 30th. And given how Speaker McCarthy has basically negotiated away pretty much all of his power to the sort of wingnut branch of his party, Bob Good and Matt Gaetz, some of these Scott Perry and some of these other guys, he's got a 4-vote margin to work with. I think a lot of the congressional dysfunction is really going to sort of inure to the benefit of the Democratic sort of side of things as we get into November. But we'll see. I mean, I'm not rooting for a government shutdown. I mean, that's the last thing our economy in Northern Virginia, all Virginia needs. We're very federally spending dependent here. And the last time we had a shutdown, it really screwed up the Virginia economy. But if they continue to play with that fire, I think it's going to create problems for the GOP in Virginia.
Okay. And I'm gonna put you on the spot here, Scott. You mentioned earlier that you are running. You would like to succeed Dick Saslaw as Democratic leader in the Senate, and Mamie Locke, Senator Locke from Hampton, is also interested. Can you talk about that a little bit and what that might mean for Northern Virginia? It's like I said, put you on the spot.
Yeah, you really put me on the spot. Thanks, David. So, yeah, I mean, a few things about that. First of all, Senator Saslaw has been an incredible leader of our caucus. He's served in the Senate for I think 42 years now, which is longer than any person ever in the state Senate. Chuck Hogan had the record before him, and Dick is just a font of knowledge and wisdom. You get in some argument in caucus or an argument on the floor, and Dick could stand up and tell you, well, in 1982, all of a sudden everybody's got clarity about the problem, right? And so having that wise presence and that stability around has been a real boon for our caucus. I think over the last at least 8 years that I've got to serve with him, and probably before that, before I got to the Senate. So we're gonna miss him. Senator Locke and I have been in the legislature together 14 years and the Senate together for the last 8. She's been our caucus chair for, I think, since Don McEachin moved up to Congress, since I want to say, so that was like maybe 6 years ago or so. 4 years ago, I was fortunate to be elected to be vice chairman of our caucus at the last retreat we had, finance retreat post-election, and which is our number 3 position in our leadership. I think if I'm not sure how many people watch our floor sessions other than my mother, but she's an avid viewer. But every once in a while, my wife will pop in and tell me I'm like need to button my coat or something. But first of all, being a floor leader is a big part of the job, and I think if you ask around, I mean, trial lawyers tend to inure to that position, and that's something I really enjoy doing. And a lot of important things happen on the floor, and things happen really fast, and you got to move fast, think fast, speak fast, recognize when there's a problem and deal with it. And there's a lot of process issues. Anyways, I think the floor leader piece is something that I really enjoy doing. Our caucus is also going to be a largely Northern Virginia caucus. It has been for a long time, and it's going to continue to be. We're going to have at least 11 senators from Northern Virginia, depending on where you count Northern Virginia. I'm optimistic we can actually take the Fredericksburg seat. And they probably don't like being called Northern Virginia, but they share a lot in common with us over there. And so the the regional dynamics, I think, militate that our caucus should be led by Northern Virginians. Also, the House of Delegates has chosen, Democratic caucus has chosen Don Scott to be their minority leader, and he's from Portsmouth. And I think having leaders in both chambers from one part of the state from the same party, I think would be, I think a bad look in a lot of ways. You need to have regional diversity in your leadership. It's important. I think Mamie does an excellent job representing Hampton. She's been a good caucus chair for us. We got the majority 4 years ago. I think if you go and you look at floor skills, you look at fundraising, you look at the regional dynamics, you look at a lot of those kinds of issues. I'm pretty confident that I'll hopefully win the fight. But, we'll see. Still a lot of we don't even know who's going to be in the caucus right now. These primaries going on, and even if you take the incumbent primaries out, we have several open seat primaries. Like I said, we got the Loudon race. We have a primary. The Fredericksburg seat we have a primary. Jennifer Carroll Foy and Hala Ayala are battling it out in a seat where one of them is going to be the senator. Same thing in Norfolk, where we have Angela Williams Graves running against Andrea McClellan. That's going to be a Democratic senator. You also have the Sproul Lucas fight playing out. Unfortunately, that's a really unfortunate circumstance. But so we'll see who's in the caucus. Have a better idea in June, much better idea in November, and then I'm optimistic that my caucus will elect me. But so
Great. Well, Scott, do you have anything else you'd like to say?
Yeah, I just, the only thing I say is, all the I wish we weren't having so many of these primaries. I mean, it's again, it's a selfish thing for me to say, but if I had my preference, I'd rather be seeing all the money that's getting spent right now being spent to hold our majority. I think I don't think a lot of people realize what a luxury it is to have a majority in a chamber or in the Senate. When I first started getting involved again after I got out of law school in 2001, we had a Republican Senate, and in 2014, we had 16 Democrats in the Virginia State Senate, and not 2005. 2005, we had 16 Democratic senators. And I don't think a lot of people remember this ancient history now, but after Tim Kaine won in 2005, Bill Mims went in with Bob McDonnell, and there was a special election for the state senate in Loudon, which was when Mark Herring came in. He was the 17th Democratic senator, and that was the start of the long, slow march back to majority. And 2 years later, in 2007, the Senate flipped 4 seats before I was even in the legislature. We flipped 4 seats in order to get into the majority. And if you recall what happened, the Republicans tore themselves apart in a primary in Newport News. Marty Williams lost to some wingnut. That opened the door for John Miller to sneak in. John Miller won. Some guy named Ralph Northam won. And then my future law partner and now former law partner, Senator Chad Peterson, beat Jean Marie Devilites in Northern Virginia, flipped the Republican seat, and then Senator George Parker flipped the Republican seat for Jay O'Brien, and that's what got him to 21. And and those a different world back then. And actually, it's odd to me that people are being attacked over votes they took back when they just flipped their seat from Republican to Democrat, but it's happening. And we wouldn't be in a position to have a majority right now if it wasn't for people like George Parker, Chad Peterson, Dave Marsden, who also flipped Ken Cuccinelli's seat to the Democrats in 2011. And it's disappointing to me that we're having to fight, that people want to sacrifice. Senator Deeds, for example, is another one. I mean, Senator Deeds, depending on how primaries go, could be finance chairman, depending on how these primaries go. At worst, he's going to be number 2 on the finance committee, probably. And at a town where it's completely dependent on UVA. And so seniority really matters in the Senate. It matters in terms of your ability to get things done. I've learned that in 8 years. The longer I'm there, the more I'm able to accomplish legislatively and in the budget. And from a party perspective, I just think you know, we have a financial advantage going into this primary cycle, but after the primary cycle is over, you know, we're gonna see where our bank accounts stand, but there's been a lot of money spent that I really feel like should be spent holding our majority instead of fighting about, you know, who's the better Democrat or whatever the primaries are about right now. And that's just, that's really, I wish this wasn't happening, but you know, it does. And people are entitled to run, so.
All right. Well, I'm last call to the audience. Any questions? We can, if not, we can get an early start on a Memorial Day weekend. So thank you for having me and having a chance to chat with you this morning, Senator.
Yeah, thanks, David. Dave, thanks for all the stuff you did with VPAP. You really built VPAP into an amazing organization, and you have a lot to be proud about with what you've accomplished there, and happy. Congrats on your retirement. And Chris Piper is going to be an excellent replacement too. I was really excited to see him picked as your replacement.
I think the board handled the succession in an excellent way, and I'm looking forward to staying involved in some way or the other. But so, all right. Well, everybody have a great weekend, and thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Dave. Bye.